Welcome to the Board Edit. We want to help you to lead more boldly, serve wisely, and impact deeply.
Our goal is to equip 1 million community-minded leaders to serve with confidence. I'm your host, Craig.
And I'm your host, Dawn. Let's dive in. You know, for our listeners today, I really want us to dive into something that I have heard you say that maybe you got it from somewhere else, but I just think it's kind of profound when you say that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. I don't know where it came from, but yeah, it's one of my new favorite mantras for sure.
Yeah. And so what do you mean by that in the boardroom?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean?
So for me, it's about how decisions are made, like the process of how decisions are made, not necessarily the decision itself, and what the vibe is. What is the energy in that room? Is there good collaboration? Is there transparent conversations? Or is it clear people spoke before the meeting and made decisions before the meeting, and there just isn't this willingness to put all the cards on the table?
Yeah. Sometimes I think we measure culture by what it's not.
Right.
Like when we start to feel the tension.
Right.
And, you know, it's not even from a clinical background. It's from a leadership background. Like I've asked in rooms before, okay, raise your hand if you feel like your family had great communication. Very few people.
Yeah.
Very few people are going to raise their hand, right? So I think we feel like it's an innate skill, but it's really a learned skill, and it's a practice skill like our whole life, because we all react and respond in situations based on whatever I clinically call it the junk drawer, right? Whatever just to open. And, you know, I love the book Crucial Conversations. Because a lot of times we all feel that every conversation is this crucial conversation, to get to your point. And so people like either don't say it or they read it as, oh, right, there's this tension or there must be this agenda because something is said. And I find that feeds into culture. But again, I think I notice it more when that's happening versus when the good stuff is happening.
So let's start with the good stuff then. Like, what does a healthy culture look like for you?
Yeah, for me, it is behaviorally, I'm looking for people who are leaning in.
Right.
And what that means is they come to meetings.
Prepared.
Let's get that in. Prepared.
Yep.
And prepared can look different, you know, for different people. But we do want them to have read every the part that they feel most engaged with, right? We get it for board members that as a CEO, the board meetings agendas can be lengthy and the packets, especially depending on the funding. I mean, I get it. Like it's very laborious to put them together. Yep. But we do want people to at least find one area, right? And so then you can find this conversation that naturally happens out of an interest of something versus thinking that there's a deficit of something.
Right.
So again, it is hard to talk about this without thinking of what's not happening.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, because it's such a contrast, right? Like
it is.
To me, like healthy culture is hearing from multiple board members throughout a meeting. But what often happens is the meeting is dominated by just a couple voices, and that is a sign of a potential toxic culture. So yeah, it's in such a contrast of when it's not working. And I think too that the tricky thing with culture is that not a single person owns it. Like it's a collective responsibility to show up with the appropriate behaviors, and that we all have alignment on our values and why we're around the table. So not one person can really even facilitate it. Like it has to be a shared commitment. Yeah.
And I think this is where I also think about, you know, everybody having their voice. And that does, you know, some of this falls to the staff, I think, to the CEO, or it falls to the chair or whoever is facilitating the meeting to kind of know enough of the people in the room to be able to engage them in conversation.
Right.
You know, both of us are trained in personality assessments. And so we know not everyone is going to be able to do that serve and return of communication at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to kind of ask for that information.
Yeah.
Because I know in Robert's Rules of Order, silence is yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Silence means consent.
Yep.
But it really doesn't.
Right.
And I can remember so clearly, and it helped to really shape me into a different leader by having a board member when I was a board chair on a board who was very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned very quickly because I super valued their opinion.
Right.
And I knew that they were going to have looked way more in depth into things. And I like to think that it adds to culture, and you see good culture when you actively have the leadership of the board and the staff being able to say, hey, why don't you talk about this? Because I think it would be a great example.
Yeah.
Or I know that you probably have thought of a detail that I didn't, but you're actively trying to engage. And I think above anything, that kind of communication facilitation adds to a positive culture.
Well, and it honors their contributions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're feeling that they're able to use their voice if they potentially were timid or shy before. And I think that was one takeaway when you were my board chair that I remembered so distinctly, you calling on different board members and not calling out, but calling on to say, hey, I really want to hear your opinion. Because a lot of those people aren't going to freely or willingly be the first one to speak. But when they do speak, a lot of people listen because it's either perspectives that people hadn't considered, or it's just a completely different take on something. I mean, you can really create blinders or tunnel vision in some board conversations because it doesn't take in other people's perspectives or lived experiences or just why they're there. So being able to acknowledge that is powerful.
Yeah, and it really it's a learned skill. Right. I'll just go back to that. And I think about there's actually, I think, a school of thought that would say that taking the time to engage can sometimes be time inefficient. Or it can be that you're trying to do things in a way that just doesn't feel productive in a meeting because you're letting other people talk.
Yeah.
Right? You're not being directive. When actually in board meetings, it's so important to consult. Yep. Because you can't really gauge sometimes just because what you think is someone's professional experience or what you assume is their lived experience, that they can't contribute to a program conversation or I would say a financial conversation because they might have something that you don't know about and maybe they've never talked about in the meeting. Yeah. But what it does then is it adds this very robust nature because you learn, you feel connected, the relationship is strengthened. And again, if you can have all board members pointing in the same direction because they feel that connectedness, that's important. But that doesn't mean that you always agree.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you never challenge. Yep. It doesn't mean that you don't point out something because sometimes you have to point it out in the moment.
Right. But it's how you point it out, right? It should be adding light with questions, not adding heat with those types of questions, and just leaning in and understanding that, oh, you're asking those questions not to challenge me or not to be disloyal, but to start a conversation. And maybe we missed this, or maybe we need to look at it differently. It's those different lenses that people show up wearing that's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah. And I think being able to, again, going back to the crucial conversations, is you're not always going to like every decision that's made. You're not always going to appreciate, I guess, a direction that a board is moving in. And knowing, again, how to think about yourself. I'm really trying hard not to say gut check, but I'm going to say gut check.
Did I call you out for it earlier? I didn't mean to.
feel like I say it every time, but in that intuitive self, how about that?
Yeah,
That
good.
just sounds really professional.
Yeah.
Intuitive self. You know, that intuitive nature about yourself when you're like, right? Because again, every board member has the same responsibility. Like your name is listed in the 990. Right. It is listed equally.
Yep. And
No one member has more responsibility just because of the title that's been bestowed on them by a board election or any of that.
Or how vigorously they might debate a topic or be the loudest voice in the room. Like that doesn't give them any more standing than someone else.
Yeah. And I think being able to just read like Crucial Conversations is actually, if you go back, there's a model that I use, which is about sort of how groups form. It's by Tuckman, but it's where you form. Well, then there's storming, right? And the goal of storming is that you don't go off and have those before and after meetings, right? That you're able to actually have that good conversation and say, hey, why don't we table that to a committee so we can study that more and feel good about somebody actually surfaced something besides diving in and keep going on with a decision that everybody wasn't comfortable with. Because if you can get through storming productively to a level where, you know, performing becomes the norm, you've got an excellent board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in contrast to the signs of healthy culture, we've talked about some of the toxic ones. What else comes to mind in behaviors that you've seen in the boardroom that is not healthy for that governing body?
You know, I think one thing, I think it's kind of a silent toxic culture. And really that goes to members who don't have term limits, or board members who don't step forward into leadership role and have that succession plan.
Yeah, or just kind of occupying a seat.
Yes. Yeah. And just, you know, and not to negate at all that feeling relevant. I certainly hope as I continue to age that I feel relevant in board service. And it's also, again, knowing that we want to create another seat at the table.
Sure.
And so I think there's some silent things that actually create, it's not always loud and obnoxious. It's these, I would even offer that sometimes it's even the way the room is structured.
Yeah.
That board members always have the same seat or the same dynamics exist in the room because of the way the environment is structured.
So ingrained into it, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I've even heard recently because of this hybrid culture that was created and we're so good at, you know, allowing people now. And I've certainly benefited from being able to show up on Zoom at times or Teams, but having this hybrid culture of in person, and then you've got a couple of people on the screen, there's really not, unless you put thousands of dollars in AV equipment, there's no way to have the same experience of a meeting. Yeah. And, you know, I'm going to admit I can multitask like the best of them. Yeah. And so I think that can actually lead to, because I think about this in terms of culture, about engaged and disengaged. And I think that can lead to disengagement.
Yeah. Or even disenfranchisement with how people are going about it, which then they double down on their behavior of staying silent and not addressing it. Versus the right move is to kind of call it out and to shed light on it. I've seen boards where, like especially the chair position, there's just such a perceived position of power that they dominate the conversation and people can't get a word in edgewise. And it creates this culture where it looks like decisions were made pre-board. So then people are sitting around saying, why am I here if you've already decided on it? Or when people do try to step up or insert themselves, they're just kind of quickly pushed aside. And, you know, that's not healthy for anyone. No one wants to spend their time feeling that way, let alone the organization's going to benefit from it.
Well, and I think this goes back to values. And I think where it can really show up for people is if you have a value of loyalty and you feel that anyone challenging you is being disloyal, right? There's no way for that not to feel toxic to you. And I think the same way as respect. If you feel that someone questioning you, or let's say other board members being late and you're always there and on time and you feel disrespected. Again, the gut check. The intuitive check. That is too where it's going to feel that way, even though there's no intention for you to feel that way. And I think that's a really good point to make in this is that sometimes you find yourself there and it really was not intentional.
Right.
It wasn't. It's just And I do think this break-in service that most people had, and everybody went to Zoom, even though it's been a few years ago now, and the global pandemic, we did kind of get used to cameras off.
Yeah, that was almost its own culture, and that people saying, "Oh, you can turn your camera off," was an invitation to not engage.
Yeah, and I think we're still coming out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see it in rooms. I see it with staff. I see it with boards that I consult with. There is this, we're not fully used to being in person. And you see it if people are on their cell phones, right? And of course, everybody has to check their cell phones at times, right? There's different things. But if you're in a meeting and you're scrolling something and you're not articulating to people, I think that allows people to have stories that you're not engaged or something is more important. And, we should be in awe of your presence, that you're just there. So I think there's a lot of silent behavioral things that can contribute. And I think, again, we cover a lot of that in the stories that we have in our book.
Yeah, absolutely. So talked about healthy signs, talked about toxic signs. I kind of prefaced the conversation with, not a single person owns it. So then how collectively do you think culture can be shaped?
Well, and I don't know if it's the background that we come from, but usually when I get involved with a CEO or a board chair who really wants to sort of revive or re-engage a board, it always goes to communication. And just like the story I started with, most of us, and it's interesting. I have a communications degree, as for undergrad. And I'm still learning like how I land. And how people perceive me. And so what I think both of us would recommend in terms of shaping culture intentionally is that a board needs to engage with some type of personality assessment. And of course, we believe in the DISC very much. We believe in the working genius. They're very simple and easy to understand tools that we offer boards in our work. But it kind of helps people to not personalize the way people say things and the way it lands. And then also for us to also keep adjusting how that lands and how we say things.
Yeah, it all goes back to how we show up. And from a working genius perspective, like I have my board's working geniuses on their name tent. So when we're around the table having conversation and I'm getting peppered to death with questions, well, I know that person's a discerner, and that's how their genius presents itself, through questions and through asking for clarification. Now, I'm a discerner myself, so then I have to tamp that down. But it's seeing kind of how people show up and why they're showing up, and that it doesn't make them a bad person because they're asking questions or, approaching their service in a different way. It's just understanding kind of how they're made up and what brings them joy and what, is the energy that they're bringing to the room.
Yeah, and I think if we're almost to time and we say any other questions, they might be a wanderer.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
They might be a wanderer. And then everybody's like, it's like in class, right? But you want to give space for all personality types, and in all seriousness, right? You want to give that, because in doing so, that's really how you form that healthy culture.
Right.
What I will also say, and it does speak to the personalities, is that people need to have a written guide. And that's why I think a really good agenda that does a balance between educating members, guiding them in the decisions that need to be made,
Right.
you know, with the board matrix and them understanding like what is their role, what is not.
Yep.
That's going to pay dividends in people feeling engaged, feeling competent, feeling confident. It's going to help them to be able to serve wisely.
Right. Well, and when that becomes ingrained in the business of how the organization operates, that's, I think, what really sustains it. You know, we talk a lot about term limits, and the expectation is that people will roll off boards. And there should never be this mindset of, oh, this organization couldn't exist without me, or they, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my contributions. Yes, your contributions are valuable, but as a leader, you should be more focused on the legacy you leave behind and who's going to fill that seat. And that's really why culture is so important, because that's what is sustaining good governance, because it's ingrained in the practices. It's almost like muscle memory that, there is an expectation that we operate in a certain way, or we have conversations in a certain way, or that we build consensus that even if you might disagree with a final decision, we all walk out of that room on the same page, knowing what the decision was and not trying to revisit it at every future board meeting. So that's really, in my opinion, what sustains that governance aspect. Successful governance is culture.
Yeah. And I think it's not only knowing sort of what the point of things that we discussed were, but it's also revisiting the mission.
Right.
And I think that's important for staff and board, right? So that everybody, it just kind of rolls off the brain in whatever way. It might not be the exact words that are in the mission statement or the vision statement, but that from your own lens what the impact of my service is.
Yep.
And I always go back to all we have to do to know whether or not it's an aligned board member is to say, hey, if I asked your family what they thought about this organization,
the ultimate litmus test. Yes.
What would they say? What would they say?
Yeah.
Because they see us when we come home from meetings. They hear us, hey, what's on your calendar today? And that's really, a really good litmus test to know whether or not this is aligned.
Yeah.
Because if you're not walking out with hope,
right.
If you're not walking out with a sense of purpose, and that doesn't mean the meeting wasn't heavy, doesn't mean that it didn't feel contentious at times, but it means that you felt heard, you felt seen, and you felt valued.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what a difference the conversation coming home feels like when you say, wow, what a great meeting. We accomplished X, Y, and Z, or our mission delivered X, Y, and Z, and like the energy that brings versus coming home and saying, oh, that meeting could have been an email. Like, what a killer of that energy. And we've all had those meetings, right? And it's not to say, every one of your board meetings is going to be perfect, because we're all human. Nonprofit work is inherently messy and there's going to be conflict, but it's about being able to walk away feeling successful, feeling confident, and that you're aligned with how that organization does business.
Yeah. And, I think ultimately making sure that everyone has a voice.
Right. It's so important. And that's why I think, going back to my mantra, which I really should Google like where that comes from in case I'm like blatantly ripping someone off with it, why culture eats strategy for breakfast. I mean, you can have the best laid plans, or you can have the most robust policy manuals that people are not visiting frequently enough, but that doesn't sustain the culture or the governance or the expectation. Those are all foundational and critical. Like, you can't not have those. But I mean, that's even the approach that we took with the Confident Board Member book, in that being behavior and values based and understanding how you show up is the first step to confident service. The policies and the responsibilities and the regulatory pieces, that comes next. It's not mutually exclusive, but you have to show up first before you can really enact said policies or strategies. And if the culture sucks, then you're not going to feel great about that.
Yeah. And I think maybe there's a mnemonic that we could develop with the word culture. We should see if we can get some help with that.
That'll be our next book.
That'll be our next book. No, because I do think, that is the heart.
Right.
That is the heart, because, we all only have a certain amount of time in this world. And you want to show up with where you feel valued, I think. Absolutely. Yeah. So we hope this has been valuable for listeners. We hope that you'll message us. You'll send us an email about how this resonates. And we hope that you'll join us next time on The Confident Board Member.
Thanks for joining us. Ready to sharpen your board skills? Explore our practical online courses at theconfidentcompanyus.com, designed to give you tools that you can use in your very next meeting.